Hey, this is Connor with Kyoto Fishing Company. Today we're going to be teaching you how to tie the Jerk Minnow. This is a pattern I've been tying for a while now, and as a lot of flies do, it's evolved over the years. But just a little bit about this fly to start out with. I tied in a lot of variations depending on what size of bait I'm trying to imitate and what conditions I'm fishing in. But right now this is a really good fly for this time of year. You've got spring, winter really moving into early spring here, and as a result fish are still a little bit deeper. They can still be a little sluggish. Fishing this fly, to get that side-to-side action, and the way I tie this version of it, which I've tied other versions that are weighted and unweighted, but this one we're going to show you today is pretty much unweighted. And to get that really good action, you don't want the fly up on top of the water, especially right now. Water temps are cold, fish are a little bit deeper. You want to fish this thing 4 to 10, 15 foot deep sometimes. And to do that, to get the action and the depth that we need, you really have to fish a sinking line. So this fly, like I said, I invented it to have sort of a side-to-side jerkbait action. But to achieve that with an unweighted fly, which we're going to be tying the unweighted version, you really need to fish it on a sinking line. That's going to allow you to get to the depths that you need to. You can still fish this fly fast and keep it relatively close to the surface, but it also gives you the option of fishing down to 8, 10, 12, even I'd say up to probably about 15 foot deep if you're in a reservoir. And that's really the key to this fly, is unweighted but getting that fly down still. Fishing a sinking line, I got a few that we like to fish here at Gahutta, but SA is one that we've really grown to like over the past few years, Scientific Anglers, and specifically their sonar series. They do a triple density line. Any of those triple density lines are really good, and again, you have to kind of tailor that to fit your conditions. But right now I'm fishing a full sink type 6, so like 6 inches per second line with this style of unweighted fly, and it's got a pretty hefty rattle in there too, so it does sink a little bit. But that's kind of the key, fishing an unweighted or neutrally buoyant fly with a full sinking line, short erratic strips. Again, if you've ever fished a jerkbait, or if you've never fished a jerkbait, I would encourage you to do that, because it'll teach you a lot about how to catch fish in this style. Short strips to get that thing to do that kind of deal, and then pause. That's the most important part of it. The pause is everything. When a wounded minnow is trying to swim away, something like this that's basically unweighted is going to move and then kind of hang, whereas a heavy clouser style fly is going to hop, and then when you pause it's going to sink. And when those fish are suspended, or when they're early in the season, what I found is that having that suspending action can be really, really helpful to putting fish in the tub. So that's kind of the key to this whole scenario. Short strips, pause, sometimes really long pauses. The colder the water, the longer the pause, and then just wait for that eat. You'll go to do that next strip and there'll be a fish on. So that's pretty much the key to how to fish this fly. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is clamp a hook in the vise. This is a Gamakatsu B10S. It's one of my favorite hooks to tie on. This is a size 1/0, but I've tied this all the way down to size 1s and 2s. So don't be afraid to mash the hatch. Also, the B10S is a great hook. It's got kind of a long shank, which is not super necessary for this fly. So if you want to substitute with something else, those little tarpon style hooks, what are those, SL12Ss? I like those also. It's a heavier hook, so it's going to give you a little more weight. But really just use the hook you prefer on this. I'm not married to the B10S at all. What I do really like though is Vivas gel spun. This is a 150 denier thread. White is what I use for almost all my flies now. You can color it if you want to, so it matches. Most of my bait fish, if not all of my bait fish, are in sort of a lighter color, pigment. Most of the time we're trying to fish clearer water, so that just matches up with what I'm doing. match the thread to what you're doing if you want to, but like I said, this is just a really strong thread, 150 deniers, pretty thin diameter, so it works really good for what we're doing here. I'm going to go ahead and start this on the shank, and then we're going to add a rattle in here. Go ahead and twist this up. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this video is there's some techniques that I've learned over the years as far as just making some of my other flies easier, and a lot of those are in this particular pattern, so I felt like it was a good one to share. It's always been a struggle for me to add rattles to flies and still maintain a slim profile if you need to. You know, especially if you're tying it onto the shank like this, you're adding a lot of bulk right off the bat. So something I've started doing is taking these rattles, and this is, Hareline makes a plastic fly rattle in a couple of different sizes. This one's awesome for this because it's got this little stem, so that really locks in. But you can use the glass rattles as well. These are a little louder actually. So again, that part doesn't matter. I've got another fly here that this one has no rattle at all, and this one was catching fish just a couple days ago. So this part you can leave out if you want to. I'm a big fan of rattles because, again, some of the lures that I fish that I've done really good on have a really loud rattle, and it's just hard to get away from that, I guess. But the main thing is what I found, an easy way to join a rattle onto your flies and not add really almost any bulk to your hook shank is to use heat shrink tubing. So this is a little piece of white heat shrink tubing, and you can see I've already done a few rattles out of this one because it's got a little taper on the end. But all this does is it's going to cover your rattle and basically give you a little stem to tie onto your vise. So I really like this style of joining it to the hook. You can also use junction tubing for like tube flies. I've done that as well. Gives you a little more flex, but this will keep your hook shank free of bulk. So I'm going to go ahead and slide this in, and then the tricky part, this is 1/4 inch. 1/8 inch is a little better because there's not as much room for your rattle to slide out. But if you, in a pinch, you can use this 1/4 inch. You just kind of got to keep your rattle in place while you heat this stuff up. But heat this up. You can see it's starting to constrict down on the rattle. I'll have to switch hands here, otherwise I'm going to burn my fingers. Okay, so that's in. I'm just going to kind of cool that down a little bit, get it to set into place. And the nice thing about this is every time you heat it up, it's going to become malleable again. So now I'm going to come back to the other end, heat that little section up, stretch it out a little bit, give me a tie-in point. That's not the best one I've ever done, but that'll work. That gives you a nice, usually I try to keep it round, but that'll give you a tie-in point right there at the back of the hook. And as you can see, that none of that's going to actually be on your shank. I'm just going to trim that little end off. Good to go. Spin up the gel spun. Tie this right on top. Kind of got to find what way it jives on there. Here we go. So this is kind of the platform that you're going to build the fly on here. So as you can see, rattles in place. That's going to shake and not have any obstruction of the sound, but it's not taking up any space on the hook. The next thing I think is really important is to take some sort of adhesive. Super glue is the best thing, you know, whether it's the Zap-A-Gap stuff, or this is just some cheap stuff that I bought, crazy glue with the brush. I like the brush applicators though. Put a dab on there, and I'm going to spread that on the whole shank and underneath that tie-in point on the rattle, because this stuff's so thin it soaks in really well, and it's going to lock all your thread wraps into place. And you can see I've got some excess on here. You can just wipe that off. Usually I do that with a little piece of foam or something laying on the desk, but as long as you're careful and you don't stick your hand to your hook, you're fine to just do it with your fingers. All right, so that's a pretty key part of the fly right there, is putting that rattle in. The next thing I'm going to do on this fly is add a little flash to it. You know, if you've ever seen any of the earlier videos on this fly, this is a step that I omitted on the original pattern, and I don't necessarily include it all the time. So if you don't have flash, you don't need it, and if you want to add some, you can. What I'm using today is, I believe this is a Hedron product, Polar Flash, in a couple of different colors. But again, I mean, just because I didn't even use this stuff a lot of the time, you can substitute whatever you want for this. Flashabou, if you want to go a little more flashy. I'm a big fan of this opal color Mirage Flash too, so don't get too bogged down with adding the flash in the back of it. That being said, I'm going to blend 3 colors here. We're going to do silver, pearl, and gold on the Flashabou. So just get you a few strands of each. You're probably looking at about 6 to 8 strands of silver, about the same on pearl, and then I go a little less on the gold. You know, heavy on the lighter colors and a little bit lighter on that gold color. I think that just gets a really natural sort of minnow color scheme going. So all I do, and you probably can't see this on the camera, is I'm just laying these individual clumps of flash down on the table, and then I'm going to hand mix them a little bit and taper them also. And we won't tie in the full length either, because you want this to be just about the same length as the brush that we're going to wrap up for the body. So this is just going to end up being maybe a little bit longer than that brush is. So I'm going to go ahead and cut off the ends on this, even everything up, and then taper it. Which sounds a little redundant, but it's just the easiest way I've found to get it consistent. This stuff's already pretty well mixed. And then to taper it, you just take those even ends, you pull the middle few of the fibers out, and it gives you a taper on both ends naturally. So now all we're going to do is tie this tail in, you know, about a 60-40 split on the material. So you want 60% of the material laying back over that rattle, tie that in, and you can keep this on top of the rattle if you want to. You can let it spread around, doesn't really matter. And then with that 40% that's sticking off the front, you're just going to bring that back, tie it so it's facing backwards like the tail, and that's going to give you just a nice little taper in your tail there. So that's the tail and the rattle section done. The next thing you're going to do, and this is a really simple fly, honestly. I know we're talking a lot about it and making a lot of it, but it's pretty straightforward. The body of this is going to be a craft fur brush. This is one that I've made, but if you want to make your life a lot easier, you can buy this stuff online. We actually sell the craft fur brush. I believe it's an EP product, and I've used it a lot. I like doing my own brushes because it gives me a little bit more control over the size flies that I'm tying. But if you're tying this yourself for the first time, I really encourage you to get those craft fur brushes, because it just makes this fly a lot easier. It makes it a lot quicker. And you don't have to use a brush. You can tie in clumps like I did on the original. Again, the reason why I went to brushes is it makes this fly way faster to tie, and it makes it really durable too. So I've got a brush here that I made out of white extra select craft fur, and if you're making them on your own, don't buy anything other than extra select. And it's just got a little bit of this new ripple ice hair, or ice ripple hair. I'm not sure exactly what you call this stuff mixed in. This is chartreuse, but it's just the pearl. It's kind of got a blue pearl color to it, but just the standard pearl ripple ice hair. Again, that's a new product from Hareline. So we're just going to tie this in right to the bin, just like our other materials. And I'm going to tie that wire all the way down, just to keep everything good and strong, and then wrap it around the hook shank, palmer it up. I'll do the first few wraps pretty close together because you're doing basically covering up that rattle on the back of this fly and covering up that taper where you tied the rattle in. But then as we go forward, you're just going to take this brush and kind of spiral wrap it and get those wraps a little more loose. I do this less for less for the fly and more for making my materials last a little longer. It's kind of nice where you can make this a little more sparse and it doesn't really affect the movement of the fly too much. Just kind of keep this all teased out as you're wrapping, otherwise this stuff's got a real bad tendency to want to bind up on itself. And you're really wrapping, you don't need much room for the head. You're going to wrap this up to just maybe an 1/8 inch behind the eye of the hook. And then we're going to tie that wire off. Get that locked into place here. Oh, I forgot my wire cutters. Ooh, just have to use some scissors. Y'all close your eyes, you didn't see me do that. And then I've got this little handy piece of kit here. This is a really good, it's a pet brush that I stole from my wife. I think it was for the cat. It works really good for combing this stuff out though. And if some of the fibers tear out, that's actually good. Then you won't be binding anything down. Okay, so as you can see, this is a pretty slim profile fly right now. And then, you know, by contrast, the finished fly here, it's pretty high and tight profile. We're actually getting that shape and profile more from the laser dub than we are the craft fur. The craft fur is more for motion, so that's the next thing we're going to put in here is the laser dub head. And again, you know, don't get too bogged down. Whatever colors you're trying to imitate, whatever bait fish you're trying to imitate rather, go towards those colors. We've got a lot of threadfin shad around here, so gray and whites are great, olive and whites are great. I've done bluegill colors. I mean, you know, you can go crazy and do all chartreuse or all black, whatever you want. But we're gonna do an olive and white here. And I try to keep, on this one, I'm gonna try to keep the material above and below the shank. You know, if you're doing more of a mullet, of a round profile, don't worry about that as much. This is a more round head. But again, these shad are pretty, you know, pretty vertical bait fish. They're not real round. They're pretty flat on the sides. So we're going to try to imitate that with the materials as well. You just take your laser dub, you kind of preen it out a little bit, and like I said, probably only going to need 2 clumps on this fly for each color. So we'll do olive on the top, hold that right on top of the hook shank, and then just leave your thread there because you got to do that belly color in the same place. So take your white or whatever color you want to do for the belly, try to get it about the same mass as the clump you did for the head. That's kind of the important part of it. Tease those fibers, get them all in line, and if it's easier, you know, rotate your vise where you can orient things a little easier, keeping that clump right on the bottom, which is now the top. And that's the nice thing. Y'all can see I mean, I could bend this 1/0 hook with this gel spun easily. It's really strong thread, and that's why we use it. It's really good for this stuff when you're spinning heads or tying bigger flies. Okay, now you can see there's just a little bit of room left on the shank here, so we're going to fill that last little bit in with another clump of olive on top, another clump of white on the bottom, and then we'll glue the eyes on and do the head, and that's pretty much it. So this just right behind the eye. And this laser dub's pretty forgiving material. We'll comb through it and brush some of this stuff out, but it's nice and squishy, so it'll still, even if you tie it right up to the eye, you usually can still squeeze in a whip finish right behind it pretty easily. Have a really neat, clean looking head. One more clump of white on the bottom. And if you got to move that around a little bit, that's fine. All right. And you can see I'm pulling back and walking my thread up. There we go. That's going to be a good clean head there. A while back I lost my whip finish tool, so I just pretty much do half hitches or hand whip finish on all my flies now. It's just what I've gotten comfortable with, but if you want to throw a whip finish on there, feel free. I'm going to do a few of those. Make sure that's good to go. Usually if this was not a fly I was going to goop the head on, I would go ahead and glue those thread wraps, but we're going to put glue over the whole top of this thing, so I'm not too worried about it. The thing I do like to point out though is if you're doing a fly like this one where it's going to be a high and tight head, more of a thread fin shad kind of profile, go ahead and glue the eyes on before you goo the fly, because pushing those eyes in from the sides really helps get those fibers high and tight. If you're doing more of a mullet pattern, which this one here, you can probably see the difference. It's a much rounder head. You can actually put a layer of goo on first, glue the eyes onto that, and then goo again, and that'll let you get a really round head a lot easier. And again, it just depends on what you're trying to imitate here, but like I said, we're kind of going high, vertically oriented like a shad here. So first thing I'm going to do is take this dog brush some of this dubbing out. Make sure all this is not going to get bound up. And now you can start to see the profile of the fly here. It's getting a lot closer to the finished product. Which way?
The rotary. There you
like
go.
That?
Yeah.
There we go. You can see that profile really good there. And for gluing these eyes on, you know, some of my older flies, and this is actually one I just had bigger eyes. You can see this one's got really, really big eyes. I really have tried to go a little more natural lately. This is probably about, I don't know, what'd you say that is, 3.5 inch fly, 4 inch fly. And the eyes on this, these are like a size 6 millimeter. So this is in the same size range. I'm not gonna go huge on the eyes. I think these are 7 mils. Again, it probably doesn't really matter. I mean, flukes work and they don't have eyes on them at all. So don't overthink it, but at the same time, it's hard not to put eyes on a fly. So we'll go ahead and stick these 7 mil. These are the fish skull living eyes. Really, really like these guys. Go ahead and pull a couple of these off and just stick them on my hand here. All right, and then to glue the eyes on, you know, we're going to goo over the whole head, which is great for durability, but to keep them in place before we do that, this Loctite gel is where it's at. You get a lot of control out of this stuff, and it sticks it on there really well, even though we're going to glue over the top of everything. Like I said, you're going to push these eyes down into the material anyways, so you're really going to see now it's starting to get that head shape where we want it to be. Make sure those are even before I put this last one on there. And I had a little excess get out the back of that one, so just take that off with my finger before we goo over the whole thing. So now we're ready for the final phase on this, which is adding the shoe goo to the head, or goop, whatever you want to call it. This is something I actually heard about, this material from Joe Goodspeed, who's a rod designer for Thomas & Thomas. He uses this stuff on his musky flies a lot, and man, it's really been a game changer for my flies. It adds a lot of durability, but it's a really good way to get this this sort of hollow head on this fly, which again is really what gives it the action, is having that neutral buoyancy in the head of the fly. So this is a good way to do that. Used to do it with UV cure resin. You can still do that, absolutely. But the nice thing about shoe goo is it adds a level of durability that I haven't been able to find with any UV cure resins. And that's the main reason why I use this stuff now. It's really, really good stuff. I've got some in a little baby mason jar that I pre-thinned. You can use this stuff straight out of the tube though if you want to, and I'm sure you can buy it just about anywhere online too if you need to get you some. It's not something that we sell in the shop, but it's definitely worth having in your fly tying kit. You want to start small. I'm actually going to get a dab of this stuff on a bodkin and just kind of put it over the eyes. It's not going to be pretty to start with, but just keep in mind you can come back and put layers and layers of this stuff on. It's not the quickest drying in the world, but it's fairly quick. So dab over each eye, and then a dab on the belly side, and a dab on the top. And you can see I got strings going everywhere. That's okay. Now I'm just going to use my fingers to kind of force that material, or force that glue rather, down into the fibers of the fly. Stuff's probably not really good to be on your fingers, but hasn't killed me yet. Let's see. Just kind of keep applying that stuff to get a fairly good coat down to, you know, really just to keep this fly from fouling. You want it to go about down to midway down the shank of the hook, almost all the way around the fly. So you're going to have to add a couple of layers to it here. And really like having a good layer on the belly just to keep that bottom from wrapping around the hook shank. You're fishing this. These flies really never foul if you put this amount of glue on them. Alright, and then should clean your bodkin off, otherwise once this stuff hardens, man, it's hard to get off. You know, you really want to make sure this stuff is gone while it's still tacky. And then that's it. You know, kind of get everything jiving as far as the profile. I'm going to check it. Eye's not gunked up, that's good to go. Check it from the side, that's pretty shady. That's good to go right there. So the final thing I'll do is just kind of make sure all your fibers are not going to be gunked up. You can run a brush through the back of it real quick to be safe. And then if you're comfortable with the profile, the best thing to do, especially if you're going to tie a few of these, is to take your fly out of the vise and just put it somewhere. Like I've made a little drying rack here. Just stick that thing where it's not going to get messed up or touched again. And so that's really the fly. You can see that's the finished product there with the Flashabou head. And I mean, just how resilient that stuff is. You know, you can completely deform this stuff and it's not going anywhere. It springs right back into place. I have not been able to rip an eye off of this stuff while fishing anyways, which is really, really big for me. You know, we're bouncing these things off trees and rocks in the river, and it's really hard to keep eyes on your flies. But this stuff is really great for durability, and as long as your fly doesn't just swing around on the hook or something, you're good to go. So yeah, that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, shoot us an email. I know everyone's on lockdown right now, but shoot us an email, give us a phone call. Our Blue Ridge number, we're getting rerouted to our cell phones here. So yeah, reach out to us on Instagram or Facebook or any of that good stuff. And thanks.